no volverán a haber elecciones. Y aquí se acabó la historia.
There will be no more elections. That's the end of the story. The political parties backed by the Yankees and the Somocistas will never return to power. Never. There will be no more elections for them to try to seize the government or seize power.
Atrapar el gobierno, atrapar el poder.
That's Nicaraguan co-dictator Daniel Ortega announcing last Sunday, July 19th, that, quote, there will be no more elections in 2027. It was quite the way to commemorate the 47th anniversary of the Sandinista revolution in Managua. I'm your host, Roman Gressier. From the studios of El Faro English, this is Central America in Minutes.
In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
they say globalism comes to die at CIPA, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes, an original podcast by El Faro English.
On Wednesday, July 22nd, the president of the Nicaraguan National Assembly, Gustavo Porras, said that he will meet with the regime-controlled Supreme Electoral Council to determine which laws need to be changed to comply with the presidential order. Porras also indicated that they'll introduce a new reform bill by the end of the month. Ortega's statement sparked a wave of international and regional criticism. In Central America, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Panama rejected the regime's position. Meanwhile, the most notably quiet voices in the region have been Honduras and El Salvador, both close U.S. allies. On Tuesday, July 21st, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio accused Ortega and Murillo of deepening repression at home and manufacturing instability that threatens U.S. national security. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, condemned the recent events in Nicaragua and said that, quote, people of all political views must be allowed to vote and run for public office. And the Secretary General of the OAS, Albert Ramdin, also condemned Ortega's statements. Eliminating elections is the ultimate denial of the people's sovereign right to elect their government, he said. The next elections were scheduled for November 2027, but 2 years ago, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruled that Ortega's re-election in 2011 was unconstitutional. He's been re-elected twice more since then, and last time, in 2021, the regime arrested 7 opposition candidates and dissolved the political parties of the 2 main opposition movements. Now, Ortega's wife, Rosario Murillo, is installed as co-president without ever being elected to that position, which the couple created for her a year and a half ago. The presidential couple took its first step toward scrapping elections altogether. But who can stop them? Pulmonary edema is a phrase that shows up again and again in Salvadoran prison autopsies. The state has repeatedly concealed violent deaths in prison under this clinical euphemism. It's what they wrote on the death certificate of a 24-year-old fisherman named Dionisio Adonai Ramirez Rivas. But the photos of his body tell a very different story. On August 24th, 2022, Ramirez Rivas arrived at the Sacamil Hospital morgue. The hospital estimated that he'd been dead for 6 to 8 hours. His body showed signs of sunstroke. Pictures obtained by El Faro show a reddened puncture wound below his right collarbone. But signs of violence on his body were ignored in official reports. The Forensic Medicine Institute's autopsy states that the death is related to high blood pressure. Quote, taking into account, furthermore, the deceased's obesity, which increases the risk of metabolic diseases, reads one of the official documents in El Faro's possession. Months earlier, he'd been arrested while helping his father clean a swimming pool. He had no tattoos and no gang history, yet 4 police officers took him in anyway, accusing him of collaborating with gangs. He was sent to Mariona prison, leaving behind his 4-year-old daughter and pregnant wife. His father, Jose Valle, recounts that the stress of the arrest caused her to miscarry unborn twins, and he believes his son was murdered. Ramirez Rivas spent 2 months in Mariona before his death. His family wasn't even told about his first court hearing. He's one of 547 people who have died in Salvadoran prisons since President Nayib Bukele installed the state of exception in March 2022. That's according to a count by Socorro Jurídico Humanitario. The total is current as of July 15, 2026. El Faro has published dozens of testimonies of victims of human rights violations under the state of exception. The UN, Inter-American Commission, and U.S. Congress have each received reports of possible crimes against humanity being committed within the Salvadoran prison system. Over the last 4 years, the newsroom has repeatedly requested interviews with the Salvadoran police, the Attorney General's office, and the Bureau of Prisons. None responded. As El Faro English reported on Wednesday, this is part of a broader policy of silence by the Salvadoran regime in the face of corruption cases, negotiations with gangs, and systematic human rights violations. Last to Guatemala. On July 15th, after a hiatus of nearly 2 years, a hearing took place in the Ixil genocide case against former General Benedicto Lucas. Benedicto Lucas is accused of acts of genocide against the Maya Ixil people during the internal armed conflict in the 80s. Back then, he was head of the Joint General Staff of the Army. His brother, Romeo Lucas, was de facto president in years when state violence made Guatemala a pariah. He's now almost 94 years old. The defense has argued that the former general is in poor health and cannot remain in pretrial detention. He's been under care in the military hospital since the hearings began in April 2024. And this month, his defense requested that he be allowed to go home pending the trial. The court granted his request. On Wednesday, the plaintiffs appealed. They argued that those accused of genocide are ineligible for pretrial privileges under national and international law. This decision is still up in the air. He could be sent back to pretrial detention for this case. Since November 2024, the final hearings in the case have been on hold because the defense filed an appeal requesting that months of testimony and evidentiary hearings be annulled. The defense wanted the trial to be restarted before a different court. Private plaintiffs in the case filed a constitutional appeal to prevent the change of court, but the High Court has dragged his feet on that decision too. Plaintiff's attorney Mario Trejo from the Association for Justice and Reconciliation told El Faro English that the house arrest is limited to the metropolitan area of Guatemala City. Benedicto Lucas is accused in 2 additional cases. The first involves the high-profile enforced disappearance of 14-year-old Marco Antonio Molina Teysen in 1981, as well as for crimes against humanity and the rape of Emma, Marco's sister. He was sentenced to 58 years in prison, which were commuted to house arrest in 2023. The second is another enforced disappearance case called Creon Paz, named after one of the country's largest military bases. Investigators found more than 550 victims in clandestine graves near the base. In 2024, the case was overturned, and Benedicto Lucas and the other defendants were released. As El Faro English reported in July, on the day Benedicto's lawyers filed for his release in the genocide case, a major burial took place in rural Chimaltenango, outside the capital. Dozens of families of victims of the internal armed conflict finally buried their loved ones. They had been murdered by the Guatemalan army in 1982. The government left their remains in a vault for decades and failed to properly bury them, so relatives took matters into their own hands. Thanks for listening today. This episode of Central American Minutes was written by Leirian Colon Santiago, Juliana Ramazzini, and Megan Mandracchio. Editing by me, Roman Gressier, and sound design by Omnian. For more journalism translating Central America, subscribe to our newsletter at ELFARO, that's elfaro.net/EN. Hasta pronto.